Hi, I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with my friend Dean Sysman, who is the CEO and co-founder of a very cool cybersecurity company located here in New York City called Axonius. Dean, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you, Ed.
Dean, I'm going to ask you all kinds of questions about your background. You have very cool sort of lead into your career in cyber. But before we get into that, for people who are watching, why don't you give us just a real brief summary of what you guys do at Axonius?
Sure. So at Axonius, we try and solve the asset management problem for cybersecurity and IT teams. And it all starts with, answering from the very first get-go, what's the number of devices that I have? If it's hard for you to answer that question, and as we learn from the market, every organization has a hard time answering that question. How do you even know, how to secure what you don't know about, or how do you secure what you don't see? And that's really the starting off point of what we call, cybersecurity asset management.
Was that kind of the original impetus, this idea that if you don't know, if you can't see something, how the heck are you going to protect it? I'm curious, was that one of the reasons that sort of led you to build the company?
Yes, I'll go into the story of where the idea came from. This is my second startup as a founder. I was previously CTO and co-founder in a startup that does something called cyber deception.
Mhm.
And I was working with a very large company in North America that I can't name. But the job there was to try and find if they had any, hackers that have been able to penetrate the network and were running around inside. And within a couple of days, we were able to find, a very advanced attack that was already researched by other groups. And it was an APT that was attributed by them to the Chinese government. And when we found this, we told the team what we saw. They were very, nonchalant about it, and asked them, "Why aren't you more excited?" And they said, "First of all, we had a hunch this was going on. That's why we brought you guys in. So thanks for confirming. But there's really nothing we can do about it now." And I said, "Well, look, here's an IP address. Here's a host name of the machine where they're operating from. Let's research this machine, understand what they're doing. It's a thread we can pull on to understand what's going on." They said, "Oh yeah, we're not going to be able to find this machine." And I said, "Well, no, this is your network. It's a machine on your network." They're like, "Yeah, we know." I'm like, "So how are you not going to be able to find it?" They said, "Yeah, we don't know anything about everything about our network." And I tell them, "Look, this looks like somebody's workstation, right? Looks like a endpoint. What happens if there's an employee behind the keyboard of that computer and he wants to install Office? What happens?" And they go, "Well, he opens a ticket for IT, and then they use one of the management tools that we have to install it." And I said, "Okay, so let's go through the management tools, and we'll find this machine." And they said, "Well, we have a bunch of them." I said, "Well, can I get a list?" And they put one together, and it was like 23 different tools. So I was astounded, but I said, "Okay, so let's go through each one. Maybe we'll find it." And obviously, we didn't have access to all of them, even though we were the global security team. But also, we never found it. Then we tried to go through the SOC. We couldn't understand what it was based on the results, and we tried to go to the networking team. We couldn't find it. And we finished that day by them sending emails to people, "Do you know what this machine is?" So the next day, I come in and ask them, "Do you even know how many devices do you have?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, of course. We have between 1.5 to 3 million." And I said, "Well, that means that you guys don't know how many you have." And they said, "No, it's very dynamic. There's always a range." And I said, "Well, look, you can look at finances, for example, right? A finance is dynamic. There's always stuff coming in and out. But if you'd go to a CFO and ask them how much money is on the balance sheet, and he would go, 'Oh, we have between 100 to 200 million dollars,' you would have very little confidence in that, CFO. So why is it different for cybersecurity?" And then every CISO, CIO, CTO I would meet, I would ask, "Do you know how many devices do you have?" And he would give me either "I don't know" or a very wide range that to me means the same thing. So I realized there's this very fundamental problem that even the most advanced cybersecurity teams have, that you can even get to a point of finding an APT, a state-sponsored APT in your network, and not be able to know what the machine that it's resulting from is doing there. And to me, that was crazy that this foundational thing, having a source of truth or having a system of record for your infrastructure, was something that was missing. And that's sort of the origination story.
It always struck me, especially when I started looking at your solution some time ago, which I think is amazing. that there's so many different directions of value when you know your infrastructure, you have an accurate inventory. I loved your example about, installing Office, because when I remember was getting my first briefings on what you were doing, I remember thinking, this really looks so much broader than cyber. I know that cybersecurity is a primary use case. That's why you and I are chatting. But man, I would think the whole IT team would benefit. Do you find, like, when you're selling, are you many cases talking to a lot of different perspectives? I bet it's not easy to do a sales deck on, with customers. What's been your experience there?
Yeah, I think today there's so much noise in the industry and so many different products and vendors and terms. It's very hard to do any kind of sales deck because people are very, overburdened by marketing and pitches. But I think the funny part is it's ironic that the more noise there is, actually the people that we sell to, the teams that solve cybersecurity and IT problems, their problems are getting more and more painful, and their importance for the organization is becoming more and more critical. And what I like to say when people ask me, I tell them I have a cybersecurity startup. They say, well, there's so many of them. What's the deal? I say, think about a car, right? The faster you want the car to go, the better your brakes need to be, right? And if you think about driving a Formula One car with a Toyota Corolla brakes, you're not going to do that because that's dangerous. And to me, the more organizations use technology, the better their cybersecurity needs to be, exactly like the engine and the brakes in a car. And people don't understand how deep and how wide the problems that IT and security teams are trying to solve. And what you said is exactly true. What we have done is start to, from a background and expertise of cybersecurity. But today, our product is utilized and valued by IT teams, by cloud teams, by engineering teams, infrastructure. Anything you can think of that requires a source of truth or a system of record for what's going on in the infrastructure is utilized today. And one example I can give, this is a public reference of a customer that we've published recently. Glue Mobile, which is a very large gaming company, very successful. I'm very, I'm a fan of theirs. And they use the solution in so many different use cases. First of all, during COVID, they had to transition to work from home. And you really got to understand from a compliance and risk perspective, what are the devices that are connecting to your environment? What are those users doing with those devices? Which are the identities and the connections to devices that are happening when you're opening up people to work from anywhere? Second, they're a company that has done a lot of M&A transactions. How do you consolidate a whole new organization's IT into yours? How do you measure the risk there? And also, obviously, anything they're doing around incident response, whether it's from a security or an IT or operations perspective. So really, once you have that solid inventory, once you have that automated fashion of consolidating all the information, correlating it into one place, really there's an endless amount of value and use cases from it.
Dean, I'm going to ask you a question. I think I know the answer to, but I suspect a lot of people might be thinking. Now, it comes to this question of source of truth.
Yeah.
When you're building out this, in a sense, a new source of truth around asset inventory, are you sort of starting from scratch and discovering? Are you taking advantage of existing sources? Are you augmenting? Help, because I'm guessing that the managers who would be explaining this to funding sources and executives will have to explain it. What would you tell them to say? What's the basic strategy that you use with your technology?
Of course. So I'm a big believer in problems, not solutions. Many times I think people start a technology or a company around a solution, and I'm a big believer in starting companies or solutions around problems. And if you understand the problem well enough, the solution is obvious. And we're a very unique solution, I feel, because we understood the problem deeper than anybody else. So what is the problem? Why in 2021 people still have a hard time of understanding, what's in their environment? And the reason is, if you go far enough into the past, it wasn't a hard problem because computing environments were very homogeneous. You had one type of device, one type of operating system, one network, one management console, and each one of those things that I mentioned Now there are dozens of different instances of that you can think of. And that creates immense fragmentation in your environment. Now, what you do is you get all these point solutions to solve a very specific problem. You'd get an MDM, or you get an agent that does that, and an agent that does that, maybe something for your cloud. And all these things, they do a great thing to create data and collect data around a specific angle. But then the problem is those things don't know about the other controls that you have, and they don't share data or understand the language of those other controls. So you have this real fragmentation of a lot of silos of data. And the more your organization is utilizing more solutions, the more best of breed you want to be, the less and less visibility you're going to have. So all of the existing solutions around discovery, asset inventory, like agents or network approaches, whether it be scanning or traffic, those are great ways to create data, but they're not ways to answer or understand your environment, because paradoxically, the reason you have a hard time understanding your environment is not a lack of data, it's an abundance of it. So what you need is something that organizes all the data together and helps you answer questions from a multitude of angles or from a multitude of control views. And that's exactly what Axonius does. The way we do it is we don't install agents, we don't scan the network. What we do is connect to those existing controls you have, whether they're agent systems or network or cloud or virtualization or identity or anything you can think of that holds data about your devices or identities. And then we correlate all that data together into one place, and we, in real time and automatically update it, and actually let you even enforce action based on the state of devices. So very quickly, you see everything you have from anywhere. It could be a container in the cloud, could be somebody working on a laptop at home, or it could be a server in a rack in a data center.
Are you able to go back and help teams kind of clean up some of these data sources, or even maybe tune them a little better? I'm guessing as you go through it, the local team probably gets a pretty good idea of where the better sources of truth are and where some of them are not so good. Do you find that with, because that's more than just inventory, that's a posture assessment in some sense. I would imagine that must happen sometimes.
Of course. That's like the example of a network scanner, right? Let's say it scans your network. First of all, these days, with the cloud and people working from home, you're not going to have 100% coverage because you're not going to be able to scan those things. But let's say you're scanning your network environment. The network today doesn't go very deep into understanding what things are, right? Because of encrypted traffic, because of authentication. So if you scan your network, you might end up getting, 100,000 IP and MAC addresses. But what are those things? Is that an unmanaged device that's risky to your environment? Or is that like a managed endpoint that's fine that it's there? To answer that question, you need a deeper view. And just scanning the network would not let you understand that. So like you said, there are data sources that provide maybe a partial set of data, or they might provide noisy data. For example, the network scanner might have done a scan once a week, but by the time you're trying to use that data, that device has already left the network or is not there already. So really the answer to that is to get as many different angles or views of an asset possible from the organization, right? So let's take an endpoint, for example. That endpoint might have several agents. It might be on Active Directory, might be logged into with an SSO provider. It might be scanned by the network scanner, or it might even show up on the network infrastructure if you actually look at the Cisco or the Juniper or whatever infrastructure you have. So the real way to get an answer on something is to be able to look at as many different views the infrastructure has on it.
One thing that's been bothering me as we've been talking here and thinking is all this compliance stuff we've been subjected to for so long. How in the world have companies been able to slide through with 20 compliance frameworks or whatever they have to do, from PCI to NIST to whatever, without solving maybe one of the most basic issues? It seems like is just something wrong with the way compliance is done? This would seem like the first question you would ask.
So I definitely do not want to get into a discussion around compliance versus risk.
That's the whole point. I want to take the whole call. Be controversial, but what you follow where I'm going here? You would think this. What? How does this happen?
So almost any kind of framework around specifically devices or infrastructure, usually one of the first items is asset inventory, right? If you look at the CIS, the first two are hardware and software inventory. If you look at PCI, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, almost any kind of compliance, it starts with, and NIST obviously, starts with understanding what you have, right? Identify and then protect. Now, I think what's happened is over time, environments became very fragmented. And it was sort of like this slowly building problem that if you go, 10, 15 years into the past, it didn't exist, or it was subtle. But now it's a very major problem. What happened? Teams today are just doing things manually. When an auditor comes in and asks, "What do you have?" They just do, this exercise of trying to run through things, trying to ask people exactly what happened with my story of trying to identify a machine. And that manual task, first of all, takes a lot of man hours. It's inefficient, and it just, it's much more a checklist for compliance than actually understanding your environment.
Let's stay on this for a minute. Like, I think what happens, tell me if this meets what you've seen.
Yeah.
Auditor comes in, says you got to do, you have to have an inventory, and you're right. Like CIS and so on. Those are. I used to be on the board over there, and those are the first couple. And then the IT team says, "Well, here's our database of record, and it's this thing. It has an acronym. It's like such and such list of inventory tracking system or something." And the auditor looks at it and goes, "Oh, is this your stuff?" And they go, "Yeah, you check." But I guess in a different guise, they come to people like you and I and say, "Well, that's our record, but it's between 1.5 and 3 million, and we don't know if that's right." Are they just not telling the auditor that it's crappy data? Because everybody got the compliance checklist or the certification on the wall. Are they being disingenuous, perhaps?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think, every security team or IT team or infrastructure team, anybody who's in our line of work is a person who's passionate about the truth, right? We're scientific or technology people. We're passionate about finding answers. And that's the value that we want to bring our organizations. So I think when you're talking about that case, I don't think it's being disingenuous. I think people are just doing the best they can with what they have. And it really is a very deep pain that every organization on the planet that we've seen suffers from. It's not, it's really, you have to pass the audit. Everybody understands that, that's a critical function of business. But you just shrug off the risk because there's no better solution. And I think that, when we go into organizations, other examples of public references that we've had, like, you can look at our website and see the logos, but I won't talk about any specific one. But something we do for every single one is show them that, for example, their agent deployment coverage is very far from what they thought it was. Because if you look at the agent system, it only knows where it's deployed. It doesn't know where it's not deployed, right? It doesn't know what it doesn't know. But if you take those other angles of the infrastructure, you take your Active Directory, you take your network side, you take your identity, your cloud, and then compare that to what the agent system knows. Very quickly, you can say, oh, according to your policy, you actually have a 20 or 25% gap of where that agent should be deployed versus where it is. And this happens in almost every organization that we utilize our product in, because really there was no way to answer that question unless you do that comparison, right?
As we move forward into the coming years, we're all sort of emerging from this pandemic. Let's take out our crystal ball here. I think cloud and SaaS become even more prevalent. They become really the backbone of a typical enterprise. Do you see like this area and your work and your platform becoming more about finding an even more fragmented and scattered set of workloads around? I would imagine your tool would become even more important as people move forward. What's your kind of prediction about that? And do I have the right premise there?
Yeah. First, I think you're right. I think there are going to be more kinds of devices, more kinds of workflows, and above all, I think there's the new normal, right, that people are talking about after the pandemic, especially around the future of work. How are people going to work? And to be honest, there aren't going to be any more office environments. People are just going to be able to work from wherever they want, either home or a coffee shop or an office environment that might not be even, a managed network, might just be like a coffee shop level network. So I think what people are talking about when it comes to zero trust, it's about that mentality that you're not going to have a perimeter anymore. The device itself and the identity itself is the new perimeter. And I think in that world, there is no other way of understanding your assets and having the baseline for how to do any part of your processes, any part of your projects without having, the right asset management. And I'm very, very bullish on that future, but I'm also very concerned about, the attacks that organizations are going to suffer from and the failures of operations that they're going to suffer from if they don't, if they aren't able to move fast enough to address that future where work happens from anywhere.
Well, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. You guys have such a fine platform. And my one call out to the
Yeah.
compliance and audit and assessment folks, be a little tougher in this area, please. If they just show you, somebody shows you a database, ask for some proof that it's accurate. And I think you'll find that might be lacking. So, Dean, for people who are interested in more, is the website the best place for them to be in touch with you?
Yeah, of course. Go on the website, do a demo request, or you can even, start a trial of the solution. We have a 30-day trial that you can use. Or if anybody wants to reach out to me specifically, I'm just Dean at Axonius and happy to talk to anybody who's interested.
Or if they happen to be walking through Midtown, then they might see you
Yes,
out
of course.
for buying some food. You and me both. So, well, Dean, listen, on behalf of my team at Tag Cyber, thank you so much for spending a half hour with us. I really enjoyed the discussion. Been so impressed with your company. I think you guys are in the right area. Not always the most glamorous thing, right? Doing asset
No.
management. For operators like me, I know it may be the most foundational and most important. So keep up the good work. It's super important. Thanks for spending time with us.
Thank you for having me. And as I always say, I just want to solve the boring and not hard stuff for organizations. So the teams that I look up to that have so much stuff that they need to solve can address those priorities.
Well, you keep up the good work. And for all the rest of you, we'll see you next time.